Architects, engineers, and craftsmen have read it. What wishes of customers you had to refuse because they defy basic rules of physics and/or common sense? I got to watch this gem of an email chain over the course of a few days last year. I'm glad it wasn't me. I'm not sure I could have remained as professional as my colleague. Paraphrased, to protect the innocent. Contractor. Hey, the inspector failed my work because I didn't construct this per your detail. Can you remove that detail from the plan? Thanks. Engineer. That was needed because of the anticipated load the owner will put there after construction. Contractor. But we didn't do it that way. So can you just pull the detail and tell the owner not to put the load there? Great, thanks. Engineer. No. Contractor. Why are you being so unreasonable? The inspector won't give us a pass until you remove the detail. We've already finished the construction. At this point, the office manager stepped in. Sounds like you need to get out there and restart construction. Contractor. But that would be really expensive. It would just be easier for us if you changed the plans and the contract documents so we didn't have to do that. Well, maybe you should have followed engineers' plans in the first place. We're forwarding this email chain to owner. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your new delayed schedule before work complete. Commenter. Always remember, contractors' first priority is making money, not building things. They will do anything and everything to save a buck. I used to design fire alarm systems. Fire alarm design is extremely straightforward because building code prescribes exactly where and how many devices need to be installed. Even so, contractors would send over submittals that completely changed my design so that they were no longer complaint with building code even after they bid on the job and won. So glad I don't have to deal with that BS anymore. Story 2. Rich couple just bought a fancy new place and brought in a fairly well-known interior designer decorator. Dude walks into the living room and the first thing he says is, OMG. This place is just perfect for a fireplace. You must get one build right here. Couple agrees because they have more money than sense, and will agree with anything as long as they think someone has some level of authority or knowledge. Problem is, the place they bought is an apartment on the 4th floor. There were 6 floors in total. There is literally no way to put a fireplace into this apartment without making massive structural alterations to the building, and I do mean massive. They couldn't even get a price estimate from any contractor because the work required to figure out the structural alterations was extensive enough to require a price estimate in itself. Story 3. Not an engineer, but I used to work on a project which allocated funding for budding entrepreneurs with good ideas for projects. I had one guy who was adamant he wouldn't talk to me at all until I signed an NDA, but wanted big money funding. Our general rule was we wouldn't sign anything unless we knew what for, so we managed to get a rough idea of what he wanted funding for. Turns out it was a perpetual motion machine that used magnets to spin a turbine. Exception, it had no way of extracting power from the system. My boss actually used the line, on this project, we obey the laws of thermodynamics. He never got his funding. I added, this reminds me of a story my thermodynamics professor told us in class. There was this guy who invented a brilliant machine that worked just like a steam engine that then fed the power back to itself. The excess power would then be converted to electricity or used in any other application. He showed the work to many people, none of them with any knowledge of thermodynamics, and each time he was told he should conceal the project, that it would save the country, and some even tried to steal it from him. Turned out it was an infinite energy generating machine, and when my professor told the guy that it wasn't possible, he refused to believe and left. Story 4. I work in the packaging industry, and I've lost count how many times a client requests something along the lines of, I want my package to be better. Hopefully I can get some good graphics printed on it, and I want it to be cheaper so I can raise my profit. So you want something better than your stapled together film wrap, but at the same time you want it to be cheaper? Story 5. Property wanted us to evaluate the condition of their boilers and determine the best course of action. What they really wanted was for us to say, yeah, you can fix those up for a few more years. Went out with a boiler inspector who condemned the boilers on the spot. We informed them the boilers were not safe at all to operate and needed replacement immediately. They wanted us to amend our report to say everything was okay. We refused, and they decided to stop contacting us. Story 6. Worked in a wood shop once upon an age ago. A lady comes in and asks for a pine thingy for her yard. Guy she's talking to says, no, pine will rot there, you'll need teak or something a bit more water resistant, especially if you're going to bury a bit of it. She was having none of it. 5 carpenters came over to explain to her how certain woods are better in wet areas. She wanted pine. Well, we had Lost Bee pine and CCA pine, but we weren't getting into this as we knew she'd come back in a few months back, asking for a free repair or a refund. She didn't get her product from us, and I doubt she got anyone else to make it either. When 6 professionals come to you to say the exact same thing, maybe consider their words or at least just Google it. Story 7. You can't ask for more software features and get the same release date when we're already working overtime to hit the one we have. Commenter? Oh, we had a good one of these at the last place I worked. Management came and said they wanted a new feature. It was actually one that our competitors had for a while and we wanted, but we're told Noon wanted it. We said, brilliant, it'll take 2 years. Very complex feature, and we had to basically rewrite a lot of the product as it was 20 years old legacy code that wouldn't handle the new feature. And then lots of testing as it is used by banks, who don't like it when data disappears. Management agreed and we started working. 6 months in, and management call a meeting and say, how are you getting on? We say, fine, might finish a bit early, another 15 months. They say you have 12. Apparently sales had told a customer we'd have the feature done in 12 months before we even started to stop them from switching supplier. Management thought we might object to that, didn't tell us. We kindly explained that there was no way 12 months was going to work. People were already working 70-hour weeks. Management said, fine, you can have 15 months, but you have to also add this other feature that on its own would take 9 months to do. Of the 120 people in the department, 40 left over the next 6 months. No idea why. Apparently, when the 15 months were up, management were shocked that the features, both of them, weren't finished, despite losing a third of the developers and no rehiring. Story 8, truss, roof design. We had things like that asterisk, all asterisk the time. It's odd having to tell an architect that the stamped blueprints still need to have weight transferred to the ground at some point. The worst I saw was a do-it-yourselfer that had almost completely removed 2 attic trusses so they could make a bigger stairway and wanted us to tell the inspector it was okay. Story 9. As a network engineer, the number of people who don't understand the speed of light as a pretty dang hard limit when it comes to network latency, ping times. That is to say, the further you move the client away from a server, the higher the latency has to be. At one point, I did a back-of-the-envelope calculation of the speed of light through fiber and the distance between 2 of our data centers, and came out with 45 ms as the absolute lower limit if I could run a single uninterrupted strand of fiber across most of the US. I can't do that, of course, so the 60 ms cross-country they were complaining about was really the best we could do. Similarly, as we move some data center services into the cloud of Azure or AWS, a lot of service owners seem unaware of how additional latency will slow them down until the move starts happening. Story 10. Defense contract. The sales engineer sold an optical rocket tracking system for use on a desert coastal test range. And it wasn't until I showed up for testing and started astronomical self-calibration that I realized, in the summer, the desert heat drives a standing dust cloud that starts at about 1 kilometer altitude and reaches about 2 kilometers altitude, and flows outward until it precipitated into the sea a few km offshore. We could not see through it. It was impossible. The only time the system was usable was either very late at night or in the winter when the dust cloud went away. The system was useless. The sales dude did the site visit in the winter. Story 11. From a customer. Why did your system fail? You said it would not fail due to a power outage. We did not have a power outage. Me. Correct. You did not have a power failure. Our system failed when it was electrically shorted due to excessive humidity. The server was under 6 of water. Story 12. So an older neighborhood is being gentrified, and a developer decides to get in on the act, buys 2 older 1-story storefronts, and plans to make them into one building for a restaurant bar. So far, so good. He hires a well-respected architect to design the space, and he decides not to remove the wall dividing the 2 old stores, which share a common truss roof, but to remove parts of the wall to create windows and leave the wall portions between the windows as supports. Restaurant opens and isn't much of a success because that part of town is still sketchy. Restaurant fails and building stays empty for a year or so. New guy buys restaurant and decides he needs more space, so he hires new architect to do something about those windows in the center wall. New architect decides to remove the wall completely and replace it with circular iron columns for that retro steampunk look, and to keep up a little support for that old truss roof. This restaurant fails because the food was horrible. Third guy buys the restaurant and decides that those iron columns are ugly and takes them out on the advice of some builder who said, that truss roof is good for that span, after building inspector had okayed the new work plan, which indicated no change to the central supports. Builder was one of those guys who hires casual labor in the parking lot of a Home Depot. Sanitary inspector arrives 1 week before opening to check on kitchen, sees that the columns are gone, goes back to his office and calls building inspector, who rushes out to check on things, condemns building as unsafe. Third owner goes bankrupt, and the building was torn down about 6 months later. I watched all this from my office window and got inside reports from the owner of the bar next door. It was the most fun about that particular job. Story 13. The salesman actually would not refuse this, and I am more specialty souring than the producer, but it fits. Customer's engineering department designed their own screw. Itself. Originally, it was a very odd thread former in steel with organic coating, because that is more weather-resistant than zinc plate. They found the coating was being damaged by the newly formed threads, and there was rust on that part of the screw that came out the other side. Complaints were made and we explained that it was basically unavoidable with these materials. So they send a new print calling 300 series stainless. I explained to sales that 300 series will not work in their application as it is too soft to form thread in the sheet metal, and refused and sent it back. I source out some standard, but specialty, fasteners that are made especially for these situations, bimetal. Customer shoots that down as it is much more expensive and not their special odd design. They come back with a new revision of the print now in 410 stainless. I explained to sales that 410 is not corrosion resistant. I don't know how hard he pushes this info to customer, but not hard enough. They order 410. I push back sales to no result. I send an order for 410 to the MFG. The MFG is the same that made the steel organic coating, and I have brainstormed with engineers there about the application and issues. They call me back and say, UTF, this isn't going to work in the application. I tell that I know, but customer produced the print and refuses to listen about it. We do it all next in our per customer print. The customer accepts the parts, and I hold my breath waiting for the other Sescourt to drop. The part comes up for reorder, and we lose the business to a lower offer. Thank God, I think. Sometime later, I hear from sales that our competition at that customer is out of favor. He tells me that the business we lost is now having failures in the field with corrosion on the parts from the new vendor, and they are refusing to share any of the costs for the failure with the customer. Of course, the salesman is all thrilled and still does not understand that our parts must be included in this until I remind him. Now that customer must have poor lot control, because there is no way that our parts did not fail as well. However, the chemistry being what it is, the 410 parts would have taken longer to corrode than the steel-scratched organic parts, but the 410 would have much more corrosion overall. So the end user complained about a little corrosion, and worse, they are seeing significantly more corrosion than what they originally complained of. But there was such a gap before the complaints, it is attributed to the more recent parts. My suspicion is, while the corrosion showed up after the competitors' parts were in the field, but it was probably our parts that were noticed. The customer looks up the currently selected vendor and calls them to discuss the issue. The competition listens and then tells them that yes, of course, 410 corrodes, and what did they expect when they drew the print up? So they don't dig any further into tracing the origin of which particular parts that were reported. I don't really have those details, but that makes the most sense. I don't know what the end result is with customer versus competitor, but I do know our customer lost all their contracts for that application. It wasn't their main business, at least. They were trying to break into that industry, which is a high-growth industry at the time. They were actually making inroads, and now they are not doing anything there at all. So we were lucky that no bad will splashed on us. But it is frustrating that sales had all the information and took such a risk. I actually tried to get other people involved to support refusing the order. 100% the customer should have gone to buy metal screws. It would have been a margin hit. Maybe they could even have convinced the end user that complained about the steel organic to help. But honestly, what percentage of the BOM cost is fasteners? You can triple the fastener cost and still have a very profitable contract, probably more than triple. If they had done this, they would still be present in a growing industry. Story 14, not a customer, but the boss who couldn't understand basics of welding and fab. When I was in college, I took a job. I knew 2 minutes into the interview that this guy was at least 90% Bs, but I was broke. And he was the only one that even came close to offering me any kind of engineering-related or CAD work, and he was flexible with my school schedule. So I figured I'd build my resume and put some cash in my pocket. He wanted to build custom stair rails in the shop so that they could be pulled off the truck and bolted into place. No problem, as long as it's built right. Think of a straight stair rail as a giant asterisk, almost asterisk parallelogram picture frame, with the ends of each part miter cut to fit together nicely. Nearly every set of stairs is different, and almost every joint is custom. So the miter cuts for one particular 10 section wound up being 4 totally random angles, something like 57.4, 124.1, 52.7, 125.8. Now you have to understand, this is a guy who claimed to have been a welder or fabricator for over 20 years and been building custom handrails for almost 10 years at that point. I hand him the cut sheet and assembly drawing. He tells me to not bother with decimals, and I tell him that's fine, but you'll have some slightly larger gaps. No problem, I can just weld those closed, which makes sense, since at less than 2 inches, those angles are tiny. I get a text the following morning with a pic showing one of the joints terribly misaligned by over an inch and asking why my drawing is wrong. Turns out that Einstein cut the 4 pieces, welded parts 1 and 2, then 2 and 3, then 3 and 4, then gets to the bad joint at 1 and 4, and is all confused why it's not fitting together. I tried to explain the concept of tolerances to him, but he just couldn't understand that 125.8 is actually somewhere between 125.75 and 125.84, so the far end, 10 and away, could move anywhere in more than a 3/16 inches range. Never mind that he ignored the decimals. Add that up over 3 joints. Made even worse when it could also twist in the 3rd dimension. And you'll never get the parts to fit if you weld one joint at a time. He also didn't think the draw from heating and cooling would be any issue. A few other things he couldn't understand. Steel flexes under a load. He wanted a rig to lift and move a 900 pounds attachment for the Hebo. He didn't believe me when I told him that the main horizontal tube would flex about 1/4 inches under that load. My first time getting to use that strengths of materials class. And we would need to add some bracing to hold everything together. 20 years as a welder. A curved rail needs to twist as it follows the radius of the stairs, or one end will not mate up with the next section. I showed him physical examples of it not working the way he tried it, and then pulled up YouTube videos showing how his equipment is able to do it correctly. He still didn't understand why it didn't work when made as a simple flat radius. 10 years building rails? My ass, I only worked for Jimmy for about a month. From what I can tell, it was more a case of him burning some family money trying to turn a hobby into a business, and him trying to fake it till he made it. He had to have spent close to $1 million on all that very nice metal working equipment. Idiot boss claims to be a 20-year expert in the welding field, but can't understand basic manufacturing or fabrication concepts of tolerances, beam deflection, or welding draw. Story 15. Architect wanted to use these specific high bays in a classroom setting. These fixtures were rated for 42,000 lumens each, which is essentially like harvesting the power of the damn sun to light a room with a 9 ceiling. They were confused when I told them that was a poor idea. Story 16. Was asked to print a set of blueprints in scale from bad photographs that would be like pouring water on a table and asking to make it stay in a square shape without using any barriers. Idiots. Story 17. None of the above, but I did work electrical at Menards, Midwest hardware store, for a while. I'd like to think I made a few contributions and prevented a few people from burning their houses down, like the geniuses who, having lost power, wanted to hook their generators up to the exterior outlets. I told them they could do that, and they would hear a pop, followed by smoking plastic and rubber the second the power came back on. My favorite was the guy who wanted a warming lamp for his shower. He had his can and his bulb all ready to go when I asked what he was working on as I looked at his supplies. Not only was the can not wet rated, but it was rated for only 75 watts. He wanted to put in a 250-watt incandescent bulb. I explained, using small words, that either his insulation, the frame of the floor above, or the can itself would catch fire or melt, and then he would have no shower, and quite possibly melted plastic on his head. Story 18. My father is an electrician and was doing work at a Walmart and ran 5 circuits through one pipe. Walmart said he needed 5 because there was no way he could do 5 circuits in one pipe. After arguing with them for a half hour, he ran 5 pipes. Only one of them has wire in it. Story 19. The amount of main contractors upgrading pumping stations that needed to be told, just doubling the size of the pumps is no good unless you also doubled the power supply, was farcical. Try and pull 120A through a 100 a fuse. See what happens. I would send at least one of these emails a month. They always reacted with surprise. Ducking civil engineers. Go dig your hole. Story 20. Chemist, here. My company sells, among other things, windshield washer fluids to brick and mortar stores. One of our products is a 5-gram tablet that one can put in their car's windshield washer reservoir and fill with water, which will produce blue detergent solution for cleaning windshields. One big difference between the liquid and the tablet is the liquid can have varying amounts of methanol, which provides antifreeze capabilities by lowering the freezing point of the water methanol mix. You need roughly 35% by volume methanol to get to the typical freezing point of -20 F. Enter sales and marketing. They ask if we can develop a tablet that can make antifreeze claims. They still want the tablet form, and for it to weigh 5 grams. They tell us this would be a game changer because it's expensive to ship water. I tell them it is not possible because the amount of methanol 5 grams of tablet could encapsulate would in no way depress the freezing point of water in any appreciable way. They respond with, but it would be a game changer. Me to myself, if we can alter the laws of physics, I'll look into it over 2 years later. I still get questions about whether we can do it. Story 21, general contractor here. A lot of people are just so delusional about what stuff costs. A lot of people have a budget that is just so inadequate for their project. A lot of times their budgets are kind of just pulled out of thin air, or they're using rule of thumb costs from like the 90S. I'm very wary of any owner that hasn't had anything built before or recently. Don't want to have them waste a bunch of your time before the project is scrapped due to costs. Story 22. I design a HVAC for new residential construction. I can't legally call myself an engineer until I pass my PE test, which I'm taking in April. Wish me luck. Although neither of these are impossible requests by a customer per se, I do find them amusing and frustration. 1. The majority of our warranty calls come from homeowners who bought a house and complain that they think their heating and/or cooling equipment is too small. They always come to this conclusion in one of two ways. Either they know someone in the HVAC business who took a look at the size of their home and their equipment and made the conclusion, or they Googled something like size of AC per square foot. Some background. It used to be that they sized heating, cooling equipment off of rules of thumb and always oversized them so that they would not get warranty calls. However, since 1996, we are now required to do thermal load calculations in order to determine the size of the equipment. Furthermore, insulation and fenestration has improved drastically since the early 90s. That means that you can't compare the size of equipment in old homes with what you think should be in your new home. You paid for a more energy-efficient home after all. You also can't size equipment off of square footage. There are a ton of factors that determine the thermal load in your building: insulation, fenestration, ambient conditions, building geometry, orientation, building tightness, etc. For example, if you built two identical homes, but one was in Peskortniks, AZ, and one was in Anchorage, AK, then you would not expect them to have the same air conditioner size. Usually what happens is that we do an airflow and temperature test in the home. We find that in 90% plus of the cases, the system is able to get the rooms up to the design temperature using the small equipment that was specified. 2. We had a particularly difficult customer who was always looking for things to complain about, especially the HVAC. He called warranty in a huff and demanded that we fix the vent in his laundry room. He apparently did the tissue paper test in order to determine if the register was blowing any air, and the tissue did not move. He then removed the grill and was surprised, angry, to find that it was not connected to any ductwork. He sent over a picture via email. It was the transfer grill to allow combustion air into the laundry in case you had a gas dryer. I can kind of understand, though, because designing HVAC is almost like witchcraft until you get the hang of it. You also have a lot of people who have been designing mechanical systems for many years, who are set in their ways, and all have a different opinion. Most people could not care less about their HVAC in their home unless it was giving them issues. Story 23. Hey, you know that old unit we've had you guys make for a decade which works perfectly fine? Well, we'd like to have a snazzy updated version. We want more functionality, more controls, a built-in computer instead of simplistic basic controls, its own Wi-Fi, double the tank capacity, and make everything more compact. The old one did one thing really well. So make this one do 3 different things at least. The old ones cost about $20,000, so we'd like the new one to cost less. There's been about 4 different meetings of them demanding this. Last I heard, there hasn't been any progress on the project. Story 24. A potential customer gave us a very enthusiastic pitch for their unoriginal device, the unique selling point being that it would last 10x longer on batteries than all the existing ones on the market, whilst being the same size, price, etc. When we asked how this miracle would be achieved, the answer was that we just buy a better battery. Like Apple and Samsung and Tesla, etc., had never thought of just using a better battery in their products. Story 25. Roughing an electrical in a block building, I made up a piece of pipe to go from a receptacle 18 inches above the floor and turn out of the block wall above the ceiling. The mason told me the pipe was above the roof. Double and triple checked the plans. The ceiling was higher than the roof. Story 26. Software engineer here, a bit late, but I have a few. 1. Customers wanting to have a product needing an X amount of time to complete in X 4 time. Long story short, fortunately did not happen to my team. Web dev team leader gets called up on a Friday evening before getting off. Management informs them that sales had just completed a sale of a new web platform. Said platform was already under discussion, but no specific details were ever discussed. At that time, a rough estimation would put the work for completing this in a proper manner in about 6 months. Management informs the team leader that they have 4 weeks. These guys ended up working overtime all this time, even on weekends. As expected, the end result was nowhere near what the customer wanted. Basically, a glorified, semi-working prototype. They ended up working an extra 2.5 months to get everything sorted out, by which time sales had already convinced them to move to a newer platform we were working on. 2. Customer not having proper prioritization in their mind. I was working solo for a startup wanting to expand to web services and such. I was brought along to start on a very urgent new service, plus setting up all the appropriate infrastructure to support cloud services. I was given 2 months to complete that. By the 3rd week, I had the basic service up and running, and we have done a few demos showing that it worked fine. Customer then pulled me off that project and asked to help them on Android dev. Mind you, I do work with Android, but I am a Spring and Java backend developer. A week after that, I was again asked to go back to the services project and add a few more features. I added them, to which the customer said that this was not what they wanted. After various back and forths, I understood that they had no apparent game plan in mind. Furthermore, They would not agree to follow my advices on how to proceed. I was the system architect and their only specialist on this field. Due to personal reasons, I had to stop working for them. Fast forward 8 months, and I find out that my position had been filled by a friend of mine who pretty much went ahead and continued my work with minimal or no changes to my schedule. Still, they have no finished product. 1. Customers should not be allowed by sales and management to choose their own release dates without consulting the DEFY crews. 2. Customers should be able to trust and hear what the guys they have brought along to do a specific job have to say. Story 27. I was once asked by my project manager to take 2 versions of the same document, about 25,000 words each, and compare them, highlighting the differences. Because he was not illiterate, his intention was naturally for me to do it manually, representing probably several full days of work at a time when we had other work coming in constantly. When I used the Mrs. Word comparison tool and printed the document out with all the differences automatically formatted and highlighted, which took about 2 minutes rather than 2 days, he said I was trying to overperform and that I was overthinking it. Story 28. In a previous job, I was asked by a customer and my manager to design from scratch, something that was A, way outside our wheelhouse, B, was beholden to numerous fire safety codes, and C, already available from dozens of vendors. In more recent times, I've been told by internal customers that they didn't like the design of a medical device because of the color I chose to render it in SolidWorks. Story 29. I worked on a giant, complicated system for a government agency that pulled polluted groundwater out of the ground, sprayed it into the air, making it into air pollution, but I digress, then pumping the cleaned water back into the ground. They wanted to control the spray system from the state capital city, so an expensive remote system that worked over the phone lines was installed. There is a lot of summertime thunderstorms, so a lightning detector was installed to protect the remote system from lightning strikes by sensing an approaching storm, taking the whole system down in a controlled fashion and disconnecting everything from the phone lines. The thunderstorms also often knocked out the power. So after that, a gigantic backup generator was installed, a system almost the size of a railroad boxcar. The generator was immensely expensive, but was finally installed completely. During a meeting, my business partner said, why is there a generator for the system when the lightning detection system has already taken the whole system down and shut everything off? Dead. Freaking. Silence. Well, you bring up a good point there. That's something we're going to have to look at. Story 30. Does it count as well? Had a user wanting us to create a share folder for them on the share drive that was beyond borked. She wanted users A, C, and D to have access on weekdays and users B, and E to have access on the weekend. On top of this, she wanted everyone to have access after business hours. She raised the biggest stink in the world when we told her that this was no possible in Active Directory. Before anyone shows me how I am wrong and it is possible, let me rephrase it. It was too much work and I refused to do it. Story 31. Work in fire protection designing sprinkler systems. They refused to give a water supply at tender, so we sized our pipe as per a similar building with a similar hazard classification in the area. We kept hounding them about it into the project, and they were having problems getting approval from the city for it. The consultant eventually gives us numbers to go off of, which didn't at all fit our current design. So we make some changes based off that. Not a huge deal, but still a bit of an extra. The real numbers finally come in and it's not good. Everything needs to come up and it's about 15 to 20% more expensive than the original contract amount. Luckily, our estimator was very honest in his pricing because there was just a huge crap storm on why does pipe one size bigger take that many more hours to put in? Well, when you cut the pipe, it goes around in the circle at the same speed, it just takes more time. It's heavier, so slower to put in, and all the fittings and sizes for everything cost a little more because they're a little bigger. After about 3 or 4 very detailed cost breakdowns and comparisons, they accepted it after we took like $1,000 off the price. We asked for the information, told you there may be a price change, told you we needed the information and proved that the information you gave us was crap, and you're still fighting us on it this much? I should charge you for all the time I spend on emails FFs. Story 32. When someone calls my shop wanting to sell me advertising on a non-digital billboard, newspaper, etc., I tell them I will do it only if they put an animated GIF on it. Story 33. While working for a particularly idiotic contractor, 1. I've had to repeatedly explain that I cannot build you a thing unless you give me the dimensions of said thing. Why? Because I can't build it unless I know how big it is. 2. No, I don't think I can put a 16 inches long piece of metal in a space 7 inches long. Just not going to work. 3. You want the drawings for part 4 of the project? Well, the drawings for part 1 aren't done yet. So how about we finish those first, and then parts 2 and 3, and then you'll get them. 4. If I build it like this, it will not pass inspection. Why? Because building code, that's why. Build it anyway? Okay, please give us that in writing. Oh, you'd like us to build it to code now? 5. Question. This spec sheet has dimensions for the same thing written in 2 different locations, and they aren't the same. Which set of dimensions would you like me to use? Their answer. Use the dimensions in the spec sheet. Another one. Nowhere in the process of owner to architect to engineer to contractor to subcontractor to sub-subcontractor to fabrication did anyone notice that the asterisk stair landing was not attached to the columns. The corner of the first floor landing was 6 inches away from the nearest 2-story column, and there was no beam extension, tab plate, or anything attaching them. They only noticed because the erectors had to attach it somehow. So they moved it over 6E, welded it straight to the column, and then somebody noticed there was now a 6 inches gap between the stair landing and the first floor doorway. Oops. Story 34. Civil engineer here. A colleague once had to do the statics analysis of a huge-ass reinforced concrete hammock an architect designed inside a living room of a family house. Story 35. I worked for a small traditional upholstery company. The owner was an antique dealer/interior designer type with no formal qualifications, and definitely not a traditional upholsterer, definitely a chancer. Some of our clients were world-famous designers. He promised a design that was impossible. He just couldn't understand that you can't float springs on thin air, but insisted that we make it. It was a very long time ago, so as I recall, the frame had been made, but without any ability to put webbing where we needed to, which is what you usually tie the springs. The company ceased trading not long after. Story 36. Going over an electrical single-line diagram for a project, I noticed the building has a 240 volts single-phase electrical service. Through some magic, the other end of a line had a 208 volts 3-phase panel. I had to call the engineer to ask where I should find the other wire. Story 37. I want you to make a program that anyone can log into for golfing. It keeps track of their scores and sends them to a database. No, I can't fund a server. Why would you need one? Story 38. True story. Mega-rich couple are building a new 25,000 square feet house. 18 months into the project, their interior designer begins adding very heavy elements to the plans that the structure is not engineered for. Tempers flare. A new structural engineer is hired. At this point, the house is ready for sheetrock. Roof is on, etc. New engineer raises doubts. Here we go. That the structure is built per specifications and undergone proper materials testing and inspections despite what the records show. Owner's lawyer up. Builder lawyers up. Destructive testing is agreed to determine the integrity of the foundation, which asterisk fails. Asterisk 5% of the cores taken. Settlement ensues. Owner has the whole house torn down and has the excavation filled in. Walked away. Story 39. Another one doing government rehab work. They want a bunch of stuff added after the initial bid, and usually after work has started, but can't fathom it taking more time. Had this job, originally it was supposed to be a quick in-and-out rehab to make it a rental for low income. Well, they start wanting a whole new kitchen. Since we're at it, we should go ahead and tear out all the old plater and metal walls and re-drywall it. Also, let's go ahead and put in a $900 floor that will be ruined in a year due to the low-income people not giving a duck about it. Let's also go ahead and put in a new furnace and redo the ductwork, even though the existing was the only good thing in the house to begin with. One more thing. Let's put a bathroom in upstairs and split the master bedroom into 2 small ass rooms. What should have been a month project turned into 6 months of hell. The lead designer was such a pain in the ass to work with. Took her literally 3 weeks to pick out paint colors. Of course, they all have to be special colors and different for every room. Initially, it was, I want to say, $15K. After it was all said and done, I think it was nearly $60K. It's a low-income rental. Do it cheap, get it nice and rentable. Story 40. Might get buried, but this one always stuck with me. My dad was a building inspector in a very affluent town for about 20 years and saw his share of crazy, unreasonable people who often had more money and time than they had sense. Anyway, a woman bought a house and basically gutted, rebuilt it. Very common in this town. So she had to have fire alarms put into current code. The code at the time, and probably now, is a fire alarm in each bedroom. This house had a hardwired system, and each alarm had a small red LED light on it. Nothing obtrusive at all. So my dad was there to do the final inspection so this woman could get her certificate of occupancy and move in. She was there during the inspection and said, "Mr. Lena, I do have a problem. There's a fire alarm in my baby's room, and I know that light will just bother his eyes. Can that one just be taken out?" My dad said, "No, Mrs. Smith. Building codes require an alarm in each bedroom. It can't be removed." But Mr. Lena, he won't sleep with that light. "Well, Mrs. Smith, if there's a fire, your child won't live. The alarm stays." He was pretty sure she was going to take it out once she got her KO, but there was nothing he could do about it at that point other than marvel at her utter stupidity. Story 41. I was once asked to proceed forward with a drop ceiling set 4 inches from the finished floor above because that should be enough for beams and wires and pipes. I was once asked if our firm could do a small commercial kitchen for less than a quarter of what it would cost. all while the guy griped that it was unnecessary that he should have to build a fire-rated wall or hire engineers for his structural work. But none of that beats the time I was given a set of schematic drawings by an owner, drawn up by freelancer to proceed into design development. And somehow neither one noticed that the stairs from one floor to the next were not even in the same location. Story 42. I work in residential window replacement. This is actually semi-common for us, where we get a crew out to the house after the product arrives. Asterisk crew removes old trim to begin tearing out old windows and finds massive termite damage, rot, black mold, etc. Crew. Hey, so, I have some bad news. Customer. Oh yeah, we had bad termite damage on that wall last year. Real nasty. Crew. So you knew and didn't want to get that repaired before having new windows installed? Customer. Well, I didn't think it would be a problem. Can't you fix it? Crew. No, we are contracted and scheduled for window installation, not remodeling. Customer. This is ridiculous. I am so pissed. This is such an inconvenience. What do I do now? I expect compensation. That's how it feels, at least. They get mad we won't repair it without upping the contract price because, guess what? We aren't contracted to fix it for you in what you signed. We replace rotted wood and that's it. Have a customer currently refusing to let us back on property unless we agree to straighten out and reframe all the openings in their home. And we're the ones they'll give a bad review to. More than half the time they're aware there's termite, mold, or an old leak that affected the wall too, and don't tell us until we've opened it up. Story 43. Good friend was lead on a road replacement project in the downtown area of a smallish city. The job was one main road and 2 blocks of the cross streets. Friend gets the plans from the engineers and notices a problem. He tells an engineer the grade level is wrong at a certain point. The engineer promptly tells him he's bonkers and just do your job. Leave the engineering to us. Then he gets the plans for the cross street where the grade is wrong and the grade on that plan is also wrong in the opposite direction. He tries to explain the problem to the engineers. Same result. You don't know how to read plans? Just build the roads, please. So, friend puts in a requisition for a 5-foot bridge at the intersection to adjust for both errors. Main contractor comes unhinged and demands to know why a bridge needs to be built in a downtown intersection. Friend sends the plans along, highlighting the errors and says, "Tell me how else I can allow for these grades, and I'll do it." I tried talking to the engineers, but they aren't having any of it. Plans were taken back by the engineers, corrections made, and my friend finally felt secure in letting other people read them and get on with the project. Story 44. I was working as the architectural consultant for the glazing replacement on a very well-known, small, residential project. It was designed by one of the greats. When the home was built in the 1940s, the only glass available was annealed, single pane, 1/4 thick. The preservation board wanted to upgrade to insulated glass, dual pane, 5/8 thick minimum. It sounded great on paper, environmentally responsible, and all that. But you see, every crevice of this project was thoughtfully considered and custom fabricated. There wasn't any slop, if you will. The window framing was detailed to fit 1/4 glass and 1/4 asterisk only asterisk. It could not be widened to fit thicker glass without impacting the detailing of the entire glazing system. It'd literally have to be rethought, redesigned, and refabricated. The guy's dead. He's not coming back to do that work himself. That would have fallen to me instead. Womp, womp. Simply explaining this wasn't enough for some of the board. It took some very elementary section drawings to fully convince them all that they were better off, literally, preserving the authenticity of the work instead of having me duck the whole thing up. In the end, they chose to stick with a single pane, tempered replacement, obviously. Story 45. No, you can connect 10 servers and 12 switches and 4 3,000 watt uppers to a single 220 volts 15 amp connection. We need to bring the electrician back and I need work with, and we will most likely need a new breaker panel as well since this is an old building and panel looks full. Story 46. Not a specialty in building stuff in any way, although I like to think I have some common sense. The lab I work at was built in 1980. Nice, solid, sturdy building. Except the architect back in the day didn't want to ruin the artistic lines, or some bullcrap of the building, and made the air intake stacks the same height as the exhaust stacks. So, if we are working with something nasty, H2S, gas oil, mercaptans, anything smelly or dangerous, it goes out the exhaust and gets sucked right back in via the intake stacks. We have had to evacuate the building a few times due to someone spilling something in one wing of the building and the intake sucking right back it to spread it around to everyone else. The architect finally died a few years back, so we could change the height of the stacks. It's going to cost upwards of $10 million just for the stacks. We also need to upgrade the fume hoods. Some of them are asbestos lined. Story 47. Architect here. Me on a job site with a builder who had taken upon himself to change the specified colors for the plastic laminate, wall, and trim paint colors and flooring selection. I'm looking at the transmittal here that says you picked up the approved finish selections from our office 2 weeks ago, but it appears not a single selection the owner selected was used. Builder. Yes, those just didn't seem correct. Nobody really uses those colors together. Me. I'm sorry. This unapproved change is not acceptable, and I seriously doubt you will be able to entice the owner, my client, into accepting them, much less paying you for this hideous selection. What in the world were you thinking? Why did you think this would be accepted? Builder. My wife likes it, and we think you both are perhaps just a little desensitive for your own good. And me. Well, I hope your wife likes the design of the house, because I can tell you, based on knowing this owner, they will never accept her in your color selections. Call me when they have been corrected. Story 48. Part of my job is doing design and drafting for a millwork company. The amount of times people have wanted a cabinet above their island with zero walls, ceilings touching it baffles me. We literally installed a cabinet on airplane cable hanging over her island because she insisted over and over again. The ceiling was a good 16 feet above the island. The thing swayed 4 feet. With a slight breeze, she called back and asked us to remove it. We did, for a fee. Another lady was insistent we use environmentally safe glues for all of our millwork. We only agreed if she waived the warranty because the environmentally safe stuff may be safer for fish if it ever got into the groundwater, but it doesn't ducking work. She got an IKEA kitchen a few years later when it all fell apart. Story 49. Slightly off prompt, but here's a funny story. My old man is an engineer who, while generally a great man, has zero respect for any architects in our town after some of the things he's seen. Growing up, he always told us, any architect can make crap look pretty on paper, but all it takes is one engineer to tell them the design won't stand. So far, his favorite rag on the architect story involves an architect who designed an elaborate basement for prospective homeowners in Tornado Alley. When presented with said architect's final blueprint, Dad pointed out that without stairs or a door to the outside, they were never going to see the basement, let alone use it. Architect was not impressed. Story 50. We usually just have customers who want to install equipment without draining their water tanks. Our equipment is underwater, and a human being needs to go into the tank to install it. I always tell them that it will be prohibitively expensive to hire divers, and even if they did that due to how impossible to see and turbulent the water would be, it would be impossible to install. But they insist on getting the quote. Also, once we had people who had a tank too big for a crane to reach the center of to do the work. Told them they would have to drain the tank. They thought maybe we could drop our extremely heavy equipment in by helicopter. I told them it would be prohibitively expensive, like just building a second tank and abandoning the first one would be cheaper. All of my stories are people asking for really high-grade stainless steel or other really expensive equipment when they need it next week and only have $12. Story 51. When I worked for a countertop place, you could not tell architects anything. I've gotten the whole, this will work, I drew it that way. Trust me, I'm an architect. Then I respond that, yeah, that may be so. But until you can tell me how to bend stone, I don't think I can make that full height splash to match your radius on that raised bar top. Or explaining to customers that an X-sized sink will not go into X-sized cabinet. But they are the same size. Yes, it is the exact dimensions of the outside of the cabinet. Not to mention, I still need room for faucet holes. Or that you want a faucet that has a pull stop that comes off at a 45-degree angle. Or that you want full thickness, 3-centimeter splash. Apparently, I needed that. Thank you, Redditors, for being my shoulder to cry on. Story 52. I feel like I'm that bad customer at the moment. I need to replace a piece of equipment with one with 10% higher capacity under worse feed conditions while still sitting in the same footprint. There is an asterisk, very narrow asterisk band of things that can be altered to make this possible, and it may not be. I want to express to them that I'm not deeply entrenched and that if they can't do it, they can say that openly and we'll change other parameters to find something that works. But so far, I've just gotten radio silence out of them, as if they're debating how to respond to my stupidity internally before replying. Story 53. I was an architect who was working for a lighting design company. The artsy farts interior designer on site for this millionaire's penthouse was delusional and ran up the budget a crazy amount because he honestly didn't know what he was doing. We were doing a final walkthrough of the penthouse after all the drywall, paint, and fixtures were installed, and he asked, in front of the client, "Can we raise the entire ceiling another foot? How hard could that be?" The contractors and I all just stared at him before the construction manager broke the silence with, "Are you ducking kidding me?" He spent the rest of the walkthrough huffing and puffing about how we were overreacting to such a simple request. Story 54. I restore vintage campers, mostly Airstreams, and my biggest thing always comes down to consumers being clueless over cost. Specifically, our flashiest camper restoration was valued just over $150,000. Of course, everyone who comes in for a consult uses that as their reference. We'd like you to do asterisk in ours just like you did on that one, but our budget for the whole project is $30,000. See why that doesn't work. Story 55. My dad was the supervising builder on a site where they were building a house on a massive hill. He took one look at the plans and told the architects that it wasn't going to work. They told him to duck off. We're architects, we know what we're doing. The foundations ending up sliding down the hill. Took a crap ton of time and money to fix the mistake because the architects didn't think the lowly builder knew what he was talking about. Story 56. Telecom engineer here. I had a customer doing a large-scale building renovation in a major metropolitan area. The building used to be a large data center, and as such, had a large amount of equipment still working in it. They called me 3 weeks in advance to let me know they needed the equipment moved because they were demolishing the room it was in. Buddy, even small projects take 4, 6 weeks, and something on this scale could easily take 6 months due to the work involved. They also had to pay for it, which didn't sit well with them. If we have plant in a location where we usually wouldn't move it, but the customer wants it moved for whatever reason, it's build work. You can imagine the cost to move a data center. Most people don't realize the amount of work involved to shift around telecom cables and equipment. Story 57. Fiber artist here. I designed a neck warmer in the shape of a Mobius strip. It was a fairly complex piece of work because it was actually 2 interlinked Mobius strips, one white and one blue. Each was an open work design, so the opposing color showed through the gaps. Was showing it to an acquaintance who said, "You should make it blue on one side and white on the other side." "It's a Mobius strip," I replied. So he repeated his suggestion more slowly because he thought I hadn't understood him. Story 58. Once had a client who was very into renewable energy and wanted all the lights in their car park to be powered with renewables. They, however, hated solar panels because they are too ugly. They instead wanted a geothermal plant. In an attempt to demonstrate the impossibility of this exercise, I roughly did the calculations for how deep we would need to dig in that part of Australia. We don't have an active volcano on the entire mainland. 12 kilometers deep, a 12 kilometers deep hole, and subsequent power station to power the lights for a 100-car parking lot. Needless to say, they didn't get what they wanted. Story 59. Also, customers who think they're experts at permitting make me want to hang myself sometimes. We had a customer who had this private property manager guy, total sleazeball. The homeowners bought 4 windows. He spent months insisting we could permit for the full 16 he intended to replace, but hadn't bought yet. He swore up one side and down the other that his HOA told him to do this. We had talked to his HOA. We had talked to the city. We do this for a ducking living. But he said he knew a lady who advised him this was the right thing to do. We eventually sent our sales manager to meet with the homeowner's wife, along with printouts of email chains, copies of voicemails and recorded calls, etc., of the conversations we've been having. Issue got resolved right away. Lots of homeowners also think permits cost only $20. Not since the 2004 hurricane season. Story 60. My boss heads up our IT department. When a laptop was stolen from someone's office, she came to me saying, "We know the MAC address and its serial number. Can't we track it next time it goes on the internet?" I had to explain that it would take months of interfacing with police, lawyers, court officials, just to get a subpoena to issue to ISPs. And even then, there is no guarantee the thief isn't spoofing their Mac or using a VPN. The machine was worth like $200 maybe. I told her to eat the cost and purchase an enterprise license of some sort of tech recovery software. She was so pissed. Story 61. Retired municipal engineer here. Had a mayor ask me, "H2O, why is it all these projects we come up with end up way over budget and screwed up?" My answer? Because you polls want some fantastic idea, and then when we tell you what it will cost, you balk and tell us to do it for some substantially less amount. Stuff gets cut, including the design budgets, and then the change orders, which are not necessarily indicative of F-ups, start coming in during construction. All basically comes down to you get what you pay for. Want a Mercedes? Then make sure you have a Mercedes checkbook. Story 62. I work at a mine. We can't make haul truck ramps steeper than 7%. The production leads crews around the mine and, using their extremely precise eyeballs, decide a ramp can go right there. So I pull it up on our mapping software and determine it would result in a ramp that is over 9%. They tell me it'll fit. I wiggle the center line of the proposed ramp a little here, a little there, and it's, at best, 8.6%. They refuse to believe this, or say, "Well, I hope you're right." On occasion, they insist that taking an existing north-south minus 7% ramp and moving the toe of the ramp further south would somehow not change the grade at all. Story 63. I installed satellite TV dishes for a while. They have to point a specific direction at a specific azimuth with just a little spin to pick up all 3 satellites. I can't tell you the number of times I rolled up to a brand new house and someone would say, "I'd like it on this wall, under the overhang, etc., that they'd specifically designed to have the dish mounted to when they built the house, on the wrong side of the house, with no possible way to mount it there and turn it enough, or it physically didn't fit, etc., all because the contractor said it would work. Story 64. A client asked this to my friend, who is an architect. A single-story house with a flat slab roof made of concrete like a big balcony on part of the house. So the owners would be able to put some chairs there, sunbath, have some drinks, etc. With the house almost done, the owner had a brilliant idea. Why don't we cut the floor and put a pool on the roof? Dude wanted a pool with a trampoline there. It took a while to my friend make him understand that the part of the pool that needs to be filled with water would have to be inside his kitchen. Dude ended up more frustrated than ashamed. Story 65. Once we got an order for some stainless steel tubes with overlapping ID and OD tolerances, but no called out wall thickness. We sent them an empty box, and they sent us a revised print. Story 66. It's pretty routine for me as a mechanical engineer. One of my most egregious requests was a firehouse on a military base. We were doing a renovation, and they let the firemen put in requests. One fireman requested a smoking shelter with a roof, heat, power outlets. I had to explain that he was requesting a building addition and it wasn't going to happen. Another fireman requested a sauna. Turns out they were taking a slide-in sauna out of another building, so they reinstalled it in the firehouse. Guess it pays to shake that tree. Story 67. I'm an electrical engineer designing power systems for buildings. Once a client requested an outlet that would sense whatever voltage and phase combination the thing you plugged in required and adjust its output as needed. It was really hard to find a way to explain that such a thing does not exist without implying they're an idiot. Story 68. Late, but I have one. I literally got asked to design a perpetual motion machine in the format of a scooter. Look, so you have this scooter, right? And you have two magnets attracting each other, one in the front and one in the back, and you just go, right? Electromagnets. How cool is that? Fortunately, I knew him pretty well, so I could bust his chops a little, but man, this is literally the first image on Troll Science. I felt perversely lucky to have been the recipient of such an historic request. Runner-up, I once got an email that said, "Can you design a stand with a dome top that looks like this?" Story 69. Back in 2009 in Finland, there was a flood in the Helsinki metro tunnels because someone drilled the revision cloud to a water. A revision cloud is used to indicate that there are different revisions of a drawing. It should never be mistaken. The funny thing, afterwards, one of the contractors denied any wrongdoing, claiming that there was no way of knowing that this wasn't an actual planned hole. So obviously BS that it's unbelievable. And also, what was the drill operator thinking? You need a training to be allowed to operate tools of this size, and that training includes how to read drawings. Story 70. Had a phone interview once with a company that makes scopes and related for guns. They asked me how I would respond to my boss approaching me, suggesting a new product that was a solar-powered scope laser. I did my best not to laugh and told them that it sounded like a gimmick. I already didn't want the job. The manager on the phone was so proud of himself for reading and agreeing with a Steve Jobs How to Manage book. So I didn't mind telling them that, because it does sound like a gimmick. But the real answer would be ask for more information because my thoughts went immediately to no. Story 71. I'm in it, but my job is to work with facilities on construction projects on campus. This means I often sit in on construction meetings with architects, GCPMs, etc. Several years ago, we did a project to add 2 new elevators to a 7-story building. This involved coring through the slab on each floor to build the new shafts. The elevators were placed in the one spot in the building that necessitated relocating every utility hookup: electric, water, sewer, natural gas, telephone, fiber optic, complete with full shutdowns and frequently street closures. Story 72. Flying a cargo plane, flight engineer, and some light coal asks if we can transport an Abrams tank among with household goods. No, coal whining. You have the space, and you're heading to *redacted* on your second leg. Just hit an R and top off. Yeah, well, the runway there is not rated for that landing weight with any fuel on board. Dump fuel over *, place *us, then redesign the runway real quick and land on 0 fuel after missing our RV and dumping 120,000 pounds of Jet A over a city. His next call was to the 130 crew. Good luck, sir. Story 73. Years ago, we were running a small LAN with a 1 GB backbone, around 80+ users with 100 MB taps. The directors complained that all 80+ users couldn't stream the 800 MB marketing videos at the same time without slow playback. I explained that this was due to the amount of overhead that streaming entails. There just wasn't enough bandwidth for everyone to stream, and that we would have to copy the videos across or watch them together in the boardroom. The reply was, if YouTube can do it, why can't we? Story 74. My company did an accelerator through the electric utility Ameren, and one of the applicants pitched a hand-powered backup for emergency power outages. The idea was that it had a really long chain, which spun a flywheel to power a generator. In the event of an outage, someone would stand down there yanking the chain to power the building. Dude showed up to all the public events throughout the accelerator trying to drum up interest. Story 75. Overclock my MacBook Pro's i9 to be faster than my desktop. Sir, it cannot even run at stock speeds without throttling. I don't care. I need it to be faster. Just give it more power. I don't think you understand that it is getting too hot. Then make it run cooler. I told him the only way I could get it to run colder without tearing it apart and using liquid metal was if he moved to Antarctica and use it outside. The thing can't even run an i7 loose, let alone an i9. Story 76. I work for a large financial institution, and we've had multiple members ask us to update our mobile app to allow them to deposit cash and not just checks. Story 77. I had a VEP ask me after construction outside our building cut a fiber line if we could just use some electrical tape to fix the fiber line. This is after he removed fail over 4G and fail over internet due to budget concerns. Story 78. Customer. I know you have already made the paint, but you can take out the colors you added into the paint and add different ones? Me. I'm sorry, but that is physically impossible. I can, however, sell you a different gallon in the color you should have purchased a sample of to begin with. Customer. Can I speak to the manager? You don't seem to understand how to make paint. Me. I am the manager. Story 79. This actually happened today. Customer was not happy with how the tile they selected looked in the space. Room isn't close to being finished. Tile doesn't even have grout yet. They want it removed and replaced for less cost than they originally wanted. What they're asking for will triple the labor and double the material cost of what their original quote was. I had to talk the wife off the ledge and convince her she will love the tile once the room is done. Story 80. Hydroelectric turbines in the K aqueduct. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the aqueduct is pumped uphill, and he wanted to, but hydro turbines downstream from there. Story 81. Former boss told me about his time building Hummer H3 and Chevy Colorados. The plant manager came in all pissy that the bed assembly line wasn't keeping up. We made 300 vehicles and only 250 beds. WTF is the bed line doing? We made 50 Hummers today. Where are the beds? Hummers don't have beds, boss. It's an SUV, has been for years. Took several reiterations to convince him an SUV does not need a truck bed. Story 82. Contractor here. Had a client get me out because I wouldn't install a stair rail that same day, which she had not even been to a store to buy. She kept saying it was my fault it wasn't installed. I couldn't get it through her head that I couldn't install something that wasn't physically there for me to install. We walked off the job. Story 83. Had a contractor call in one day with a few questions for the drawings and CS calculations our office had sent to him. After asking a few completely normal questions, out of the blue he asks, "Is it okay if we cut this rafter I half? It's in our way when making this inner wall." I kindly asked him to rethink his last question, and he just went, "Oh, so that's a no then." Story 84. Had an order for a pool table once. I said yes. It was $20,000 in my pocket. The kicker is, they asked for all wood, no slate, which is what the playable area is made of. I told them that it would warp, but they persisted. I ended up making it for them, but haven't heard from them since. Story 85. Hey, I found this grainy picture of this intricately carved 16th century masterwork. Can you 3 days print it? It will only take you a half hour to duplicate this thing that took a skilled master stoneworker 8 years to complete, right? I can pay you $20. Hey, where are you going? Come back. I haven't told you about the follow-on projects yet. Story 86. Cheap, fast, easy. Pick two. It's less of what the customer wants and more of what the salesman said would work. I have to go back and find all the components that the salesman left out so the price would look cheaper, and now it has to come out of the company's pocket. Rarely will the project get a re-quote unless the salesman missed a crap load. Story 87. I always have to reject my clients' ideas because they don't obey the basic laws of economics. If you want your custom house to only cost $500,000 to build, you can't keep increasing the size of every room. I've designed a lot of million-dollar houses for clients who did not have a million-dollar budget. Story 88. Potential client. We want you to machine these parts out, if aluminum. Us. Okay, here is our price. PC. We got another quote for this from another company for $X6. Us. That price is less than the wholesale cost of the material to make your parts from. Good luck with that. Story 89. Homeowner asked if I could just have the 23 yards of concrete delivered and dumped in the driveway. Her husband would take care of it when he got off of work. Story 90. I've gotten more than a few prints with a dimension tolerance of +/0.0000 on some feature. For those unfamiliar, you can imagine that zero deviation in size is an asymptote, and the graph that approaches it in the positive direction is the representation of cost to hit that tolerance. Story 91. Civil engineer. I had one customer who wanted a walkway to his building to not include expansion joints because he wanted it to look smooth. Story 92. I'd like to see this thread, but with the things you had to accommodate despite defying physics and/or common sense. I bet a lot of us have stories like that. Story 93. What do you mean you can't remove this support column that's holding up an entire floor and is already poured in the slab? I want the center of my apartment to be clear. Just re-pour the columns around the edge of the apartment. Story 94. We want an entire new vehicle designed and built in 2 weeks. Yeah, I can design it, but you're getting what is very much a prototype first. and the actual thing will be finished on something resembling a reasonable schedule. Story 95. Look, we need to get this product to the US as quick as possible. Air freight is too expensive and the boat will take too long. Just put it on a truck and stop annoying me with the details. Story 96. I frequently have to explain patent, trademark, and copyright laws. I have no problem doing that. In fact, I love teaching people about my industry. It's the ones who get mad about it that I have a hard time with. Story 97. Remodeling bathroom for super nice old lady. She asked if we can do the bathroom with those really nice pink and black tiles. We told her that nobody made them anymore, so she let us do what we wanted. Came out great. Story 98. Apprentice electrician. Architect on a commercial job didn't want us to install an exit sign because he doesn't like the way they look. It's a legal requirement, so my journeyman told me to ignore him and install the exit light.